let's talk more about the implications of these numbers, how to read them, what it could mean for the Federal Reserve as well. We're joined by Claudia Sahm Consulting founder, and Yelena Maleyev, KPMG economist. Thanks to you both for being here. Claudia, let's start with you. Just give us, first of all, your sort of broad read on this number. Directionally, it still feels right, but then you've got this oil issue, and I don't know how much of an issue it is going to be going forward and feeding through to the core number.
The oil issue, the higher gas prices, this should be a reminder to all of us that the Fed is not in charge of inflation. Right? Like, these are geopolitical events that are driving energy prices. And so I think it's just a good reminder of today is not all about the Fed in terms of policy responses. It's a big deal for families. Right? This is a necessity good. So that's very disconcerting. And yet, we do see over the past months some real relief in terms of inflation coming down in a steady way across other categories.
And Yelena, would love to get your perspective on this as well. So if it is more geopolitically driven, then when can or should we expect any of the at least kind of gasoline or energy related inflation puts that are within this report and continuing to show up in the numbers? When should we expect that to abate?
Well, we've actually already started to see some of those relief from inflation numbers coming in over the last few months. Remember, energy prices peaked in June of last year. So the lowest hanging fruit on that inflation relief have already been picked. So we have been seeing an overall deceleration. Just a few months of increased gas or energy prices does not a trend yet make. And I agree with Claudia, this is not up to the Fed to influence, especially food and energy prices. The question is, going forward, whether or not those prices are going to be embedded through to other categories. That's what is the concern here. And that's what we didn't see in the 2010s when energy prices were increasing. So that's what officials will be paying attention to going forward in future months to see if those costs are going into other costs as well.
How do we know if they will, Claudia? What does history tell us about the speed with which some of these energy costs feed through to other types of prices? And what do we watch to see whether it's going to happen again this time?
Yelena is absolutely correct. This relationship has not been a stable one over time. It's as with many things of inflation, we just watch, right? I mean, when you see these big reactions, energy intensive sectors like the airlines, transportation, it makes sense that we see it there. There are other places where it could be, but in general, the thought is that quote unquote pass through how much energy prices affect the other prices is relatively small. And again, we are past the really big increases in these prices, which we saw last year. And frankly, there wasn't that much evidence of big effects outside of energy then.
Looking at some of the areas where we did see at least some decreases, at least in certain index, lodging away from home, used cars and trucks, recreation, among some of the indexes that did decrease over the month. If you're a consumer looking at this data that's come out this morning, Yelena, what should your kind of broader read be on it?
Well, most consumers are really impacted by things like food and energy prices. So those are the things they're going to be looking at first and foremost, but then that will potentially impact their decision on spending on other things. So whether they think about taking vacations, taking airfares, buying airfares versus taking their car when they're traveling. And so these are the kinds of decisions that households have to make when inflation is still really high. Remember, we're talking about inflation, which is the change in prices. The actual level of prices is still increasing. Those price levels are still higher than a year ago and higher than 2 years ago. And that's really squeezing consumer wallets. And when we've only recently seen wages actually coming up higher in terms of growth rates, higher than inflation only recently in the last few months, households have been getting squeezed for a while. So this silver lining really is that might temper some spending on other goods and other services, which would help bring down the underlying inflation pressures. But the food and energy definitely help drive the consumer decisions, especially when prices are still high.